On the dusty roads, the Son of God walked without a fixed address. At night he sought shelter under the stars, in humble houses or in the silence of the olive trees. When he slept amidst the storm, he revealed more than weariness. He showed absolute trust in the Father. Now he invites the weary to find rest not in a place, but in him. Before we begin, write in the comments where you are watching from. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. We continue. Foxes have their dens, birds build their nests, but the Son of Man, the one who called the universe into existence with a word, had nowhere to lay his head. During 3 years of public ministry, Jesus walked more than 5,000 kilometers along the dusty roads of Palestine. He slept in fishing boats, in borrowed houses, under the open sky. The Creator of all things lived as an itinerant homeless man, and the only time the Gospels record his sleep, violent waves threatened to drown him. To comprehend where and how Jesus rested, it is necessary first to understand the world in which he walked. First-century Palestine was a territory approximately the size of the state of Sergipe, but with variations in altitude that challenged any traveler. Jerusalem stood 800 meters above sea level. The Sea of Galilee, 180 meters below. The Dead Sea, 400 meters below ocean level. Going from one place to another meant ascending and descending mountains, crossing dry valleys, facing scorching heat during the day, and cutting cold at night. Roman roads offered some structure, but most paths were beaten earth, loose stones and narrow trails between olive trees. A common traveler covered between 25 and 32 kilometers per day, depending on the terrain and the season. This meant that the journey from Nazareth to Jerusalem, approximately 120 kilometers by the most direct route through Samaria, took at least 3 days of uninterrupted walking. By the alternative route, avoiding Samaritan territory and descending through the Jordan Valley to Jericho, the distance jumped to 170 kilometers, and the travel time almost doubled. Jesus made this journey dozens of times. The Gospels record that he went up to Jerusalem for the 3 mandatory feasts of the Jewish calendar: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. Just these annual trips, starting even in childhood with his parents, added up to more than 13,000 kilometers throughout his life. And that was only the route between Galilee and the capital. The public ministry added thousands of additional kilometers, crossing the region in all directions, from Caesarea Philippi in the extreme north to the vicinity of the Judean wilderness in the south, from the Mediterranean beaches of Tyre and Sidon to the Greek cities of the Decapolis in the east. But where did travelers sleep in this ancient world? The answer reveals much about the daily life of Jesus and his disciples. Hospitality was considered a sacred duty among the Jews. Abraham was revered as the supreme model of a host, and rabbinic stories told that he kept his tent open on 4 sides to receive travelers from any direction. When pilgrims arrived in Jerusalem for religious feasts, local families were obliged to receive them without charging anything. Rabbi Nathan described Jerusalem as a city where no one ever said, "I did not find a bed to sleep in," and where payment for lodging was not accepted. This culture of welcome meant that travelers rarely needed to seek commercial inns. They simply entered a village at dusk and waited to be invited into someone's house. If no one invited them, they sat in the public square until a resident appeared and offered shelter. The book of Judges tells the story of a Levite who did exactly this in the city of Gibeah, waiting in the square until an elder took him to his house. It was the custom established for centuries. Jesus and his disciples lived within this system. The Gospels show repeatedly that they stayed in the houses of known or unknown people along the way. In Capernaum, Jesus frequently slept in Peter's house. In Bethany, on the outskirts of Jerusalem, he was received by Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. When he sent the 72 disciples to prepare his way, Jesus instructed them to look for a house of peace in each city, a home that would welcome them, and remain there eating and drinking what was offered to them. But there was not always a house available. And even when there was, conditions were radically different from what we imagine today. A typical Galilean peasant house in the 1st century consisted of a single room of approximately 4 meters by 4 meters. The floor was beaten earth. A raised part, called a mastaba, served as a sleeping area for the whole family, while the lower part near the door housed domestic animals during the night. Donkeys, goats, and sheep shared the same space as the residents. The body heat of the animals helped warm the environment on cold winter nights. Beds did not exist in the modern sense. People slept on straw mats or thin rugs spread directly on the ground or on the raised stone platform. A thick cloak served as both blanket and mattress. The law of Moses forbade a creditor from withholding a debtor's cloak during the night, exactly because without it, the person would have no way to protect themselves from the night cold. Pillows were a rare luxury. At most, a smooth stone or a bundle of folded clothes served as a headrest. When Jesus said he had nowhere to lay his head, he was not using an exaggerated figure of speech. He was describing his literal reality. Unlike the scribes and Pharisees who had their own houses in Jerusalem, unlike the fishermen who returned to their families in Capernaum after a day of work, Jesus lived permanently on the road. His ministry did not allow establishing a fixed residence. Each night was a new unknown. Would there be someone willing to receive him? Would there be space in some house already crowded with pilgrims, or would it be necessary to sleep in the open under the stars, with only the cloak as protection? Commercial inns existed, especially on major trade routes, but had a terrible reputation. Rabbis described them as places of prostitution, theft, and deceit. Innkeepers were considered people of dubious character, frequently listed together with thieves and tax collectors as people whose testimony was not accepted in courts. A respectable family would never take women or children to a public inn. These inns, called caravanserais, were simple structures, a large square courtyard surrounded by high walls, with a well in the center and a series of niches or small rooms around it. Travelers could rent a space in the niche or simply spread their mat in the open courtyard, together with their animals. There was no privacy, there was no comfort, there was no guaranteed safety. The Good Samaritan of Jesus' parable took the wounded man to one of these inns and paid the innkeeper to care for him, an extraordinary gesture of generosity in an environment where most people would avoid leaving anything of value. Jesus and his disciples likely avoided these places whenever possible. His group included women who accompanied them and helped finance the ministry, such as Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna, mentioned in Luke. Taking these women to a public inn would be unthinkable. This meant the group depended entirely on private hospitality, or when that failed, the open sky. And the open sky was a frequent reality. The Mount of Olives, on the outskirts of Jerusalem, functioned as a huge open-air camp during Jewish feasts. When the city's rooms were all occupied, pilgrims pitched tents or simply slept under the trees. Luke records that during his last week in Jerusalem, Jesus spent the days teaching in the temple and the nights on the Mount of Olives, not in a house, not in an inn. On the mount, in the open, probably together with thousands of other pilgrims who did not find shelter within the city walls. But perhaps no place reveals more about Jesus' sleep than the fishing boats on the Sea of Galilee. The sea, actually a freshwater lake approximately 21 kilometers long by 13 wide, was the center of the region's economic life. Dozens of fishing villages dotted its shores. The boats used in fishing were simple wooden constructions, about 8 meters long and 2.5 meters wide, equipped with sails and oars. They could carry up to 15 people, although the space was tight. Jesus used these boats constantly. They served as a means of transport between the villages around the lake, as a teaching platform when the crowds became too large for the shore, and occasionally as a refuge to escape the pressures of the crowds. In one of these boats, after a whole day teaching crowds so large that he needed to move away from the beach, occurred the only moment where the Gospels explicitly describe Jesus sleeping. It was the end of the day. Jesus had preached for hours under the hot sun, using parables to explain the kingdom of God to thousands of people. His voice was worn, his body exhausted. When the sun began to set, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to the other side of the lake." They embarked immediately, without stopping to rest or eat. Mark's text specifies that they took Jesus just as he was, without preparation, without provisions, straight from work to the boat. While the disciples rowed or adjusted the sails, Jesus went to the stern of the boat, found a cushion, probably the helmsman's padded seat, and fell asleep. The Greek word used for cushion suggests a specific object, not improvised. It was the only item of comfort available in that workboat, and Jesus used it. His exhaustion was so deep that the rocking of the boat and the noise of the oars did not disturb him. Then came the storm. The Sea of Galilee is famous for its sudden and violent storms. The geography of the place explains the phenomenon. The lake sits in a deep depression, surrounded by hills and mountains. Cold winds descend from the heights of Mount Hermon to the north, collide with the warm air over the water, and generate storms that can transform calm waters into waves of 2 or 3 meters in a matter of minutes. Experienced fishermen knew this danger well. The disciples who were in the boat included at least 4 professional fishermen: Peter, Andrew, James, and John. They had grown up on that lake, faced storms since childhood, knew every change in the wind and clouds. If these men were afraid, the situation was genuinely dangerous. Mark uses the Greek word lailaps to describe the storm, a term that suggests a violent gale, almost cyclonic. Matthew goes further and uses seismos, the same word used for earthquakes, indicating that the boat shook as if it were on unstable ground. The waves broke over the vessel. Water entered faster than the men could bail it out. The boat began to sink, and Jesus continued sleeping. The ability to sleep amidst this chaos reveals something deep about the nature of Jesus. He was not pretending to sleep to test the disciples. He was genuinely exhausted, so tired that not even waves beating against his body could wake him. Jesus' humanity was real. He felt hunger, thirst, weariness, pain. His body needed rest as much as any other human body. The difference lay in his inner peace. The disciples finally woke him, shouting, "Master, do you not care that we perish?" Jesus' response was immediate and sovereign. He stood up, looked at the wind and the waves, and ordered, "Quiet, be still." The original Greek is even more direct. "Silence, be muzzled," like someone giving an order to a dog that barks endlessly, and immediately the wind stopped. The sea calmed down. The terror of nature was replaced by another type of terror. The disciples, who seconds ago feared dying by drowning, now trembled before the man who controlled the elements. "Who is this?" they asked one another, "that even the wind and the sea obey him?" This scene encapsulates the paradox of Jesus' sleep. He slept because he was human and was exhausted. But he slept in peace because he trusted completely in the Father, and he woke up to demonstrate that he had authority over creation itself. The man who had nowhere to lay his head was the same one who sustained the universe with his word. But this was not a common trip. Jesus' journeys frequently took him to hostile and distant territories, where rest was even more precarious. One of the longest expeditions recorded in the Gospels was his trip to the region of Tyre and Sidon, Phoenician cities on the Mediterranean coast, in territory that today belongs to Lebanon. This journey took Jesus outside the borders of Israel, to a predominantly Gentile region, where Jews were a minority and frequently viewed with hostility. The historian Josephus recorded that the Tyrians were notoriously our bitterest enemies, not exactly a tourist destination for a Galilean rabbi. The distance from Capernaum to Tyre was approximately 60 kilometers in a straight line, but the actual route was much longer due to the mountainous terrain. Jesus likely went up through the Hula Valley, past the ruins of the ancient city of Hazor, and crossed the mountains that protected the coast. The complete trip, including Sidon to the north and the return through the Decapolis to the east, covered more than 160 kilometers, an expedition of at least a week, possibly 2. During this journey, where did Jesus sleep? The Gospels do not say. We only know that in Tyre he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, according to Mark. But even hidden, he was found by a Syrophoenician woman who begged for the healing of her daughter. The attempt at rest in anonymity failed. Jesus' fame had arrived before him. This trip illustrates a constant pattern in Jesus' ministry, the impossibility of truly resting. Even when he sought moments of retreat, the crowds found him. Even when he crossed borders into foreign territory, His reputation preceded him. The man who healed the sick, cast out demons, and taught with never-before-known authority could not simply disappear. His sleep was always interrupted, always provisional, always stolen from the few hours between the end of a day of ministry and the beginning of the next. The Gospels record several occasions when Jesus sought solitude to pray, frequently waking up at dawn while it was still dark, as Mark says, to go up a mountain alone. These vigils of prayer suggest poorly slept nights, divided between the little rest the body demanded and the communion with the Father that his soul sought. On at least one occasion, the night before the choice of the 12 apostles, Luke records that Jesus spent the whole night in prayer on the mountain, without sleeping even a minute. Jesus' physical exhaustion was not accidental or heroic in the human sense. It was a direct consequence of his mission. He had only 3 years to train his disciples, proclaim the kingdom, heal the sick, confront corrupt religious leaders, and walk to the cross. Each day counted. Each hour was precious. Rest was a luxury he could rarely afford. And yet, paradoxically, rest was exactly what he offered to others. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened," said Jesus in one of his most well-known declarations, "and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." The man without a fixed address promised an eternal address. The tireless traveler offered permanent peace. The one whose body knew extreme fatigue invited others to place their burdens on him. This promise was not abstract. Jesus personally knew the weight he offered to carry. He had walked under the scorching sun, slept on dirt floors, woken up with pain in his back and feet, faced hunger and thirst, felt the weariness that makes eyes close involuntarily. When he invited the weary to come to him, he spoke as someone who understood weariness by personal experience. His empathy was not theoretical. Jesus' sleep also carried a deep theological meaning that his contemporaries would have recognized. In the Old Testament, peaceful sleep was a sign of trust in God. Psalm 4 declares, "In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety." Psalm 127 adds, "He grants sleep to those he loves." Sleeping well in the Hebrew worldview was evidence of a clean conscience and solid faith. When Jesus slept during the storm, he demonstrated this trust in a supreme way. The disciples, terrified, asked if he did not care about the possibility of them dying. The implied answer was clear. He did not worry because he knew it was not time to die. His Father had other plans. The storm, however violent it might be, could not defeat the divine purpose. Jesus slept because he trusted absolutely in the one who controlled even the winds and the waves. This sleep of faith contrasts strongly with another famous sleep in the Scriptures, that of Jonah. The rebellious prophet also slept during a storm at sea, was also woken by desperate sailors. But Jonah's sleep was a sleep of flight and fear, an attempt to escape God's presence. Jesus' sleep was the opposite, rest in the Father's presence, unshakable trust in the midst of chaos. The first Christians understood this difference. When they faced persecutions, prisons, and martyrdom, the image of Jesus sleeping in the boat became a powerful symbol. Acts of the Apostles tells that Peter, on the night before his execution scheduled by Herod, slept so deeply between two soldiers that the angel sent to free him needed to strike him on the side to wake him. Peter had learned the lesson of the boat. If the Master slept in peace during the storm, his disciples could do the same. Jesus' last days in Jerusalem intensified the pattern of precarious rest. During Passover week, he taught in the temple during the day and withdrew to the Mount of Olives at night. The house of Martha and Mary in Bethany, about 3 kilometers from Jerusalem, likely offered some shelter, but the Gospels suggest that many nights were spent in the open, in the garden called Gethsemane. It was in this garden, on the last night before the crucifixion, that Jesus faced his darkest hour. While he prayed in agony so intense that his sweat became like drops of blood, the disciples slept. 3 times he returned and found them asleep. "Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" The irony was painful. The man who rarely slept needed company in his anguish, and his closest friends could not keep their eyes open. This final sleepless night preceded the most brutal day in human history. Jesus was arrested, tried, flogged, mocked and crucified in the hours that followed. His body, already exhausted by years of itinerant ministry and a night of agony in the garden, faced tortures that defied description. On the cross he finally found the rest that had been denied to him in life, not restorative sleep but death, and then came the tomb. For 3 days Jesus' body rested in a borrowed cave, just as in life he had slept in borrowed houses and borrowed boats. Even his grave belonged to another, Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin who secretly followed Jesus, gave up his own new tomb to house the Master's body. But the tomb could not contain him. On the morning of the 3rd day, Jesus rose, leaving behind the linen cloths that had wrapped his body. The rest of death gave way to eternal life. And curiously, one of the first things the risen Jesus did was prepare breakfast. John records that a few days after the resurrection, the disciples were fishing on the Sea of Galilee when they saw a man on the beach preparing fish over coals. It was Jesus. He invited them to eat, served them bread and fish, and then talked with Peter about the future. The man who had nowhere to lay his head now had the entire universe as his home, and yet he chose to appear to friends in a simple setting by the lake preparing a meal as any Galilean fisherman would. Jesus walked more kilometers than most people of his time would cover in a lifetime. He crossed deserts under the scorching sun, climbed rocky mountains, crossed stormy seas. He slept where he could, when he could. His feet bled on Roman roads. His body knew the exhaustion that makes eyes close even when waves threaten to sink the boat. And it is exactly this Jesus, the one who had nowhere to lay his head, the one who knew extreme fatigue, the one who understands the weight of human weariness, who looks into the eyes of every exhausted person and makes an invitation that no other master ever dared to make. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The man who never had a bed of his own promises eternal rest. The tireless traveler offers peace. The irony is not coincidence, it is purpose.